Hello.
We're here.
Krystyn, we are here. We are present and accounted for.
Yep. We took a lot of roll call this weekend.
Oh. How do you guys do roll call?
I mean, when you get on the bus, you just have to make sure every name and person is accounted for.
Bueller.
Yep, that's how we do it. Charlie does it by instrument, too.
Like, take call of the instrument?
Yeah, he's like, I need 2 snare drums and doopy-doopy-doo.
I could see him saying that.
Oh, yeah, he's a fun teacher.
I bet.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been listening to this book recently that I just found on Spotify. And it's talk about manifesting and bringing things into your life.
Mm.
And the premise is really joy and being light and joyful instead of so serious all the time.
It's stuck in your ego?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not just stuck in your ego. It approaches things from the infinite abundance perspective. And so it kind of approaches like scarcity mindset at the same time of like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not, life is not that serious.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, because the universe will provide for you.
Well, that's just it. I mean,
anything you need.
For sure. And I think when you lean into that and you start having those visualizations of all of your credit card debt at 0 and your mortgage at 0 and your bank account with millions of dollars in it, it's already yours.
Well, and it flows more easily to you once you have the visualization going.
I remember probably over a year ago, maybe closer to 2 years. It might be closer to 2 years at this point, having a real conversation with myself about finances and letting go of the emotional attachment to finances.
Right.
And just seeing it for what it is.
Well, and it is a currency that is here to help us exchange energy in a certain way.
Right.
And when you can kind of approach it like that rather than money being bad.
Right.
Or money controlling your life or dictating.
Or money is evil.
Right.
You know, and just having that emotional connection to it.
I think that evil that you're talking about feeds really well into what we're going to talk about today.
Oh, I would agree.
And that, let's welcome everybody. And then we're just going to get into it because this is the balance of darkness and light, you guys.
That's right.
Welcome.
I didn't start with you.
I know you didn't. The minute I looked at you to like, okay.
Because I was like, I need to like snort my nose.
You looked down.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, okay.
All right. Welcome to Two Mystic Mamas.
Yes. So good at that.
Do you know what? I just looked over on your mantle. You have the phases of the moon.
I do. I made that.
Which is fantastic. It kind of talks, about the episode a couple episodes ago about how we're all in phases and we just move from one phase into another phase, which I think also that visualization is really good for today's episode too, talking about the light and the dark and how it ebbs and flows and there's a balance.
Well, I really want us to go even further than darkness and light because this goes beyond good versus evil, which I think is what a lot of people think of when they think of darkness. They associate it with evil. They associate light with heavenly energy, right? When that's not necessarily the case. It is one way to look at it, but there are many others.
Yes. I'm going to blow this candle out.
Okay. We had a little energy clearing candle. It's black. Black is also a color that is attached with protection.
Which is, again, you're talking about dichotomies, but I bet a lot of people would not associate protection with black. But think about like black ops.
Well,
and the military and stealth and all of, the symbolism behind that.
You really want black ops with this?
Black ops, that's right. Let's talk about the military.
I was going to go with yin and yang, but
I have plenty.
Sure, let's talk about
I have plenty of that too.
Black ops, Rachel.
Can you, first of all, limited, but
yes,
I always,
as is mine.
Do you think it would be like the funniest? Have you ever seen one of those movies where it's like a play on? So like take a movie that I know movies are your jam, but
I'm actually going to reference a movie today.
Oh, okay.
Man, I already have it planned.
That's good. But like a movie that's like serious about black ops and about spies and all of that. And then like put a Mr. Bean into that like main character. That would be Rachel if I was, and I would, first of all, I wouldn't ever
you're
make
the Mr.
it.
Bean of the military?
I would be the worst spy the United States has ever seen. Not that I would ever make it that far into any of it, but
I know that you are talking about military operations, but in my mind, I was envisioning like the jungle from the Predator.
Jungle from the Predator.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Predator?
No.
Oh, then it doesn't hit.
Yeah, I was like, what? Anyways. Okay, so let's talk. Let's get into yin, yang.
First, I want to go back to this movie reference while we're here.
Okay.
And this is something that I was thinking about in terms of evil, right? And that is Darth Vader and the dark side. Are you guys a Star Wars family?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, but this is like a really good example of why darkness is not inherently evil, right? It's unbalanced. And if we look back at Anakin as a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was Jedi trained in all the forces of the light, right? The light side of the Force.
Right.
And he was basically taught to suppress his emotions, his fear, and especially like attachment, right? Anger, grief. Like I feel like those are pieces of that like Jedi training that were like instilled into him, right? As he was being raised. And then the, Sith Lord of gaslighting comes in with promises of like power in control and the ability to stop loss, which is what his like big thing was.
Well, his parents were murdered.
Right. But when he came in, he was so afraid of losing his loved ones.
Oh, yeah. No, it was,
right?
It was all suppressed. And they made him channel it into the Force.
Right. But I think my point is that Anakin wasn't inherently evil.
No.
He had a lot of unprocessed trauma.
Yes. Yes, he did.
And he was afraid of losing the people that he loved.
Right.
And he found strength in the wrong places.
Right.
And ignoring that we have a shadow self, which I think we should get into what a shadow self is, but ignoring that you have a shadow self doesn't make it disappear.
Mm-mm.
It just makes it stronger, right?
Well, it can. It can make it stronger. It does make it stronger subconsciously. And when you become conscious of it, that's when you can start taking the power back from it.
Well, right. It gives it more power. If it stays.
Right.
It continues to stay in that unbalanced place,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think that Anakin would have turned out like if he had therapy?
Well, the interesting thing is Anakin at the end does come back. At the end, Luke is the one that basically saves him from the Death Star and takes him out and gives him a proper burial and a proper send-off. And, they basically have that come to Jesus moment where, Luke is like, I love you. And he was like, I love you too. I shouldn't have basically done all of this. This is what life's all about. I think that's such a good reference though for people too, because it's important to give like visualizations to this particular topic because it also shows how flawed humans can be but also how forgiving and how loving and how dynamic or complex we really are.
Right.
And where those emotions kind of sit in the yin yang of the balance of. So I think that's a great one because there's so much of that in Star Wars in general.
Right.
Like you could use that for like, you could apply it to all of them.
Well, Star Wars is also used, it's called the hero journey. And there's a lot of brands that use this as a marketing tool in their businesses. And they basically try to solve problems for people and create this hero journey arc for people in all of their marketing and branding.
Right. Because every hero along the way has plenty of pitfalls where it's,
right.
everything they're trying to do seems so unobtainable, like they're never going to accomplish it.
Right.
But then we all know how the movies play out. So
I mean, it would have been a much shorter saga if he had just gotten some damn therapy, but
yeah. Also, one might think that the creator himself, the genius behind it all, would also need some therapy.
I feel like creating that world was his therapy.
Yeah.
In a form.
Mm-hmm. He was young. And even I remember when we started this podcast and we would have discussions right after my spiritual awakening, I had suppressed a lot throughout my journey due to the fact that I was under the impression that in order for me to accept my metaphysical gifts, I had to also accept what I didn't want to accept, which would be evil. Growing up in the Catholic Church, there's a huge emphasis on the devil and hell and Judas and, and I'm not saying that I don't think hell and evil is bad. I would 100% say that there are lower frequency energies that exist in demons for sure that I think do exist out there. But just because I am accepting my gifts doesn't mean I accept that, and that I've learned about protection and about leaning into the light. And the light, when we're talking about good versus evil, good will always trump evil. It will always win. There's things that come in and, ping from time to time, but overarching, if you lean into divine source energy and your team of light, that's at a high frequency and vibration. So like the other shit can't even remotely come into the picture.
Well,
which is just allowed me to fully embrace.
Right.
And on that same breath, also realizing that dark is not the same thing as evil.
Well, that's just it, right? So like
those are two very different things.
If we don't have darkness or shadow, right? There's no depth, there's no contrast. There's no, if you look at this from a standpoint of art, right? There's no transformation in the moon.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
There's no transformation in ourselves. So just like sunsets blend day into night, we need both halves to be whole. But that doesn't mean that we should chase only the light. And it doesn't mean that we should throw ourselves to the shadow either, because and this is kind of part of the principle with yin and yang, is that when we deny one side, we throw ourselves out of balance.
Right.
Right. And so if you actually look at a yin yang symbol, you have the dark side, which is the dark and the feminine and attached with the moon and rest and intuition. Then you have the yang, which is the light, the masculine, the sun, the action side of things. But each side still contains a bit of the other.
Correct.
So there's always a little light in the darkness, and there's always a little dark in the light. And I think that we can look at that as hope during hard times, as struggles in success, right? Like they can coexist.
For sure.
And it's, the yin yang concept comes from Taoism. And really the philosophy there is that opposites are not enemies.
No,
they're there to complement each
That's
other
right.
with an E.
They're
not with an I.
Yeah, they're opposite qualities. That's right. And then, just touching on the yin yang and going a little bit deeper then is you have the chi, which is the energy that exists in it all, which flows through us. It is us. It's the whole, it's everything.
I think that we can take this from both like a spiritual and a mystical perspective. I just try to put all of that into one word. Wow.
I'm rubbing off on you.
Also, I know.
What would that word be? Spiritual and mystical? Nope. Doesn't roll off the tongue.
Yeah, I think we'll leave that right where it's at.
Yeah.
But also from a standpoint of like personal growth. And like we've talked about before, learning to sit with discomfort.
Yes.
And instead of running from it, moving through it.
Yes.
And that is hard.
It is.
If you're going through hard parts in your life, hard seasons, going through the mess is really fucking difficult.
Yep. It takes a lot of work. I was just listening to a podcast on the way up here that touches on this, and the doctor that Andrew Huberman had on, and he was using Andrew as like the live example, if you will. He said, now ask yourself a question about like, where are you finding that emotion? And then asking the emotion how it feels. And it was this whole interactive session.
Oh, I love that.
But it was Andrew doing Andrew.
Right. I mean, there was a newer episode?
It is. Yeah. There was this particular doctor was facilitating it on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was really fascinating because naturally with shadow work, I've only really started getting into this in the last year. And, you know, I got 42 years. Not that you have to drum up every single fucking thing that had created some sort of, you know, memory or emotion, though there will be reoccurring themes if you don't address it. And you can, when you start thinking about things that happen that are reoccurring, that's when you can start doing the work. And again, it's all, to your point, it's inner growth.
But I want to talk about something because we've used this terminology a lot on this podcast. And I don't think we've really dug in to what it is.
Shadow work?
Right. So like, because a lot of people think of shadows as bad, right? But it's necessary for wholeness. And the philosophy is that every person has a shadow, parts of themselves that they suppress, reject, they're ashamed of, they hide away from the world because they are insecure about it or
it's safe. Most of the time.
They think it keeps them from being vulnerable, right?
Yes. And it tends to also keep them from having to address something that makes them feel a certain way. Because it all goes back to emotions, and emotions drive our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So how things feel. Naturally, people in general, most humans want to be in a happy, joyful place.
Right.
And so getting to that is where they want.
But you can't live there. Like you can't live in either place, right? And I think that's the biggest message of this podcast is that you cannot pack up and live in the light and you cannot pack up and live in the dark. And you need to integrate both of them. And I think that darkness is not about getting rid of it. And I learned this when I was going through somatic coaching with
for
Vanessa.
Sure. Yes.
And the biggest thing is like I had all of these parts of myself, and we hear this all the time, and we use the terminology release, let go, what doesn't serve you. In my mind, I thought that I had to somehow exercise that from myself, and I thought there was something wrong with me.
Right.
Because I'm like, no, this keeps coming up. Like, I've done this work, but it's still there. Like, It's still a part of me. But she taught me that it wasn't about that.
Correct.
It can live and exist, and it's about merging that and integrating it, acknowledging it, and understanding it, and embracing the lessons that come from it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the definition of the shadow self for us?
I sure do.
Ooh, girl, hit us with it.
So shadow work is the process of exploring and integrating the hidden or repressed parts of your personality, often referred to as your shadow, naturally. And it is in analytical psychology, the shadow is the unconscious aspect of the personality that does not correspond with the ego ideal, lending the ego to resist and project the shadow, creating conflict with it. The shadow may be personified as archetypes, which relate to the collective unconscious, such as the trickster.
It's interesting. I mean, it's definitely something that controls us unconsciously, but something that we are consciously avoiding at the same time.
And I think it's really fascinating when you start acknowledging when your shadow self presents itself. And that's when you get curious. Like, I can use a real life example. Jeff and I got into a pretty large argument a couple weekends ago. And actually, you guys were supposed to come down and hang out. And I was like, must cancel this event. The energy is completely fucked at this point in time.
Oh, man.
And again, when you get into an argument with somebody, I think a lot of times it's like trying to be right when really that's the feeling, right? When we stand our ground or put our foot down and say, this is it. But the next day, not even the next day, later that night, I was like, I just wanted to be acknowledged. But yeah, just using that as an example, it was, and I brought it up to Jeffrey because men especially struggle with dealing with shadow more so than women, because women are caretakers and we're empathetic and we're just wired differently. Don't they say men are from Mars, women are from Venus? And I was like, this is part of your shadow self that you need to work on, because I just wanted you to acknowledge me and meet me where I was. And instead of doing that, you doubled down and was like, well, now that you're mad at me, I'm mad at you, even though you had no reason to be mad at me.
But here's the thing is, as much as we might need that from our partners, they might not yet be in a place to even acknowledge that shadow self. And so, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't even know what the fuck you two are talking about, it usually presents itself like self-sabotage or fear or unexplained emotional triggers or avoidance. If those feelings are coming up for you, then you might be operating from a place of shadow self and not, and just avoiding those feelings because they're uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I would say that it's something that is not super mainstream. And again, this is out of all of the practices we talk about, this is going to be one that's not as enjoyable.
No, it's not.
But it is necessary if you are on a path of growth.
Ugh, I know. And it hurts, man. It's hard. It is hard to face your shadow self.
Yeah.
But
again,
it's also
that's
hard if you have emotional trauma to discern the difference between what is yours and what somebody else.
Whose are you carrying?
Right.
Because a lot of times, this happens a lot when children have to play roles of caretaker.
Right.
When it's not theirs. That really should not have happened. And that becomes evident a lot when you are dealing with trauma. Because trauma doesn't have to be a traumatic experience. It can just it can stem from something that happened where you had to assume a role at some point.
Right.
And what entails with that.
Well, and people make choices consistently, like especially as a child, right? Mm-hmm. People consistently make choices that create trauma for other people to have to carry for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And it is really like one of those things to acknowledge and try to understand, because we're all carrying some sort of trauma that is not ours.
Yes.
And I try to have a lot of conversations with Evie about this because I don't want that for her. Like, if I can avoid it at all costs, now obviously there are things that are out of my control and it pisses me off. Mm-hmm. It pisses me off because I don't want people's baggage to hurt my kid, right? Whoever that is. And that can be like as simple as like, gosh, did you ever remember being a kid and somebody like said something nasty to you?
Yes.
Whether it was like a friend, a parent, or whatever. And that, whatever those words were, that saying was just like stuck in your head.
Oh, yeah.
Rent free for a long time.
For a long time. Yes.
And those things grow into bigger problems as you grow and the more that you avoid them. Now, when we're young, we don't know how to even process that.
Correct.
We just think it's ours to hold. We think it's our fault.
Yep.
We always like assume that. But it's like, okay, how do we focus on this enlightenment that comes from feeling that shadow self?
Because the thing about what you just said too is when you acknowledge the shadow, that's exactly what you're doing. You're acknowledging it.
Right.
It's not like you're feeding it or you're giving it more energy. You're coming to a place of, I see you, and you sit with it and how it makes you feel and why it makes you feel that. And then you move on.
Well, and also we can transmute it to the light.
Yes.
So we can take it, we can learn the lessons from it, and we can make something that's sat in darkness and in shadow something that's beneficial for us.
Correct.
It takes a lot of work and a lot of practice and a lot of time, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Lots of, just different ways.
This is such a heavy topic, but I think it's so important.
Yeah, this is definitely a heavier one. But I mean, honestly, I can always reference most of our episodes back to a Disney film or 5 because Disney's so well written and there's so many subconscious and subliminal messages in them. But even, one of the OGs, Mr. Peter Pan, his shadow.
I know. I love Peter Pan.
Runs away from him. And he's like, I need you back. I
Right.
can't survive without my shadow. And then he has to figure out how to reattach him. And even when we think about when we're walking, I love this analogy. And I have a really good video that we can put out that goes with this. But when you're walking with the sun behind you and your shadow is in front of you, I do this with Isla all the time.
I love this.
It's so much bigger and scarier than in reality. But you can play fun. You can play fun. You can have fun with it. You can, use your imagination and use these analogies to just know that this is part of growth. This is part of, and you don't do all of your shadow work all at the same time.
Oh, this is small chunks.
So, there's, if you're interested,
chunks.
There are really good books out there. I can reference some in the notes so you guys can go and look into getting them that are basically workbooks. And you just do them 1 or 2 pages at a time.
I have one that a therapist had recommended to me, and it was like a CBT workbook for perfectionism. I mean, I can still only do a little bit at a time because if you're doing it properly.
As you should, because you want to maintain that balance.
Right, you're digging in. But I want to talk about the other side of this too, because I am a joyful person. I am a love and light kind of person. However, I also am a embrace the shadow kind of person. And this happens a lot in social media now, is this illusion of light or this toxic positivity that's happening where we're ignoring the darkness because we just don't want to think it exists. It doesn't make it go away. Right. And just like we can be blinded by looking at the sun, if you have too much light and you're not having the contrast of the darkness, it's blinding to your life.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just walking through life not really feeling or seeing things other than some very specially curated parts that you've deemed acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So people are putting themselves in a box either way. Right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're not integrating and blending the dark with the light and we're living in darkness, then we're living with fear running our lives. And if we're living in a place of toxic positivity, then we're not actually feeling the depth of our emotion because we're only allowing ourselves to feel the good stuff.
Totally.
And we don't grow when we only feel the good stuff.
Do you think toxic positivity is a new term?
I think the terminology is new, but I don't think that it's a new concept. If you think about
well, yeah, because it would have been in magazines.
Well, I remember
in publications and
somebody that I was friends with,
television.
I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, called me Pollyanna.
Oh, and then you didn't get the reference?
Right. And for me, it's at the time I didn't get it. I didn't understand it.
Right.
But I also know that I know who I am. So
that's talking about another Disney.
Right.
But that's good because I want to look this up really quick. But so Pollyanna is a 1913 novel by American author, considered a classic of children's literature. The book, but what's it about?
I think she was
cheerful orphan changing the outlook of a small town. What does it mean to be? What is a Pollyanna person? Here we go.
So it believes that life's most difficult problems can always be surmounted by a positive attitude and pragmatism.
Oh, so glass half full. Always looking through things with rose-colored
glasses. I wouldn't even say that.
Okay.
I wouldn't even say that is glass half full. I think they're calling it irrepressible optimism, which I do find the good in everything, but that doesn't mean that I don't see, because I'm always looking for the lesson, right? So I'm seeing the dark, I'm seeing the shadow.
I think and I think it's also important to also recognize in that same breath that you put your energy where you fucking want it to go. So
but this person that called me this is also so cynical. Like one of the most cynical people I've ever met.
So it's ironic that
it is.
Yeah. But see, that's the thing too. Like you probably don't associate yourself with that person anymore for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So
and it wasn't even like a conscious thing. We just fell off as friends, you know?
Naturally.
Yeah.
Not a conscious thing. That's right. Your subconscious was doing the work,
Right.
bitch. She was like, we're done. All right. Well, go be a Pollyanna. Go find your Peter Pan. Work on your shadow. And just know that all of that energy that you put towards that work will benefit you. It might not feel great in the moment. But again, as Krystyn always says,
discomfort is not a threat.
That's right. That is the theme of the day.
We love you guys so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for digging in with us.
That's me giving you guys kisses. Virtual, energetic kisses.
She just made out with you over the internet. All right. Love you guys.
Bye.